Hello, I'm Marilyn, the Chief Executive of the Celiac Disease Foundation, an organization devoted to accelerating research for treatments and a cure for celiac disease. If I leave you with one message today, it is that celiac disease is in fact a serious autoimmune disease with a devastating impact on both those afflicted and those who care for them. The only treatment for celiac disease is a gluten-free diet, which means strict avoidance of all forms of wheat, rye, and barley. It is the only disease where we ask patients to be their own pharmacists, compounding their gluten-free food, their medicine, in their own kitchens. Gluten hides in expected food items like bread, pasta, pizza, cereal, cakes, cookies, and muffins, and in unexpected items like salad dressing, soy sauce, barbecue sauce, French fries, and tortilla chips not fried in dedicated fryers, and beer. As little as 50 milligrams per day of gluten triggers damage from celiac disease. To put this into perspective, a normal diet contains greater than 10 grams of gluten per day. 10 milligrams of gluten per day is considered safe, which is equivalent to 1/8 teaspoon of flour. And gluten is virtually impossible to avoid as 80% of our foodstuffs contains it. Eating gluten-free can be prohibitively costly, with an average market basket of gluten-free foods being 183% more expensive than their regular gluten-filled counterparts. And despite what athletes and celebrities may tell us, gluten-free substitutes contain more fat and sugar and fewer nutrients and may increase the risk of heart attack due to reduced consumption of whole grains. But perhaps the greatest failure of the gluten-free diet as a treatment for celiac disease is that, depending on the study, 30 to 50% of subjects on a gluten-free diet for celiac disease exhibit symptoms or continued intestinal damage. It is little wonder that patients compare the treatment burden to be comparable to that of end-stage renal disease. My son Henry is why I'm here before you today. Henry was ill from birth and was suffering for reasons the best specialists in Los Angeles could not determine. He suffered from unbearable pain, can't get out of bed fatigue, endless stomach aches, headaches, sinus infections. He endured medications, medical procedures, and at the lowest point in middle school would say to me, "Mommy, my brain is telling me to kill myself again, and I don't want to. Please help me." It was a 15-year ordeal until a doctor finally ordered a blood test for celiac disease. We were then told to put him on a gluten-free diet, the only treatment available, even today. But what no one told us is that there's no such thing as a gluten-free diet, because gluten is in 80% of our foodstuffs, making it virtually impossible to avoid cross-contact with gluten when you leave the house, and for many of us who share a kitchen, even in our own homes. Henry struggled in high school, where teachers and coaches failed to understand that an inadvertent gluten exposure could mean several days with can't get out of bed fatigue and debilitating gastrointestinal symptoms. For away games, the school insisted that he could not provide his own food and instead starved him by offering a salad or a lettuce wrap burger from a fast food restaurant, festivals of cross-contamination with gluten, leaving him no choice but to skip eating. At UC Berkeley, we met with the dining staff to learn of their gluten-free options and their trained kitchen staff, but what they failed to mention was that while the options may have been gluten-free, all were self-serve, with items made with gluten next to those without, leading to shared serving utensils and rampant cross-contamination. 4 times in the first semester alone, Henry was admitted for IV fluids due to vomiting from inadvertent gluten exposure. That same year, he was diagnosed with Hashimoto's thyroiditis. Upon graduation, Henry took a consulting position, which put him on the road, working long hours with food ordered in or dinners out. By the second year, he was so ill that he temporarily moved home and worked from his bed. In his words, "I could control the food ordering as the junior person on staff, but as I moved up the ladder, that wasn't an option." After year 3, he made the decision to leave his chosen career and find a position that did not require travel, all so that he could have control over his diet. Before COVID, we met at a pizza chain with a certified gluten-free pizza. He identified himself as having celiac disease. The pizza that arrived did not look gluten-free, but he was assured it was. 3 days later, he was still vomiting. Henry is now 27, and without an adjunctive or monotherapy, celiac disease is still controlling his life. Henry's father was diagnosed in his 40s after Henry was diagnosed. Subsequent to his celiac disease diagnosis, he was diagnosed with Hashimoto's, psoriasis, and most recently, lichen planus. We worry that Henry will continue to develop more autoimmune diseases due to his years-long exposure to gluten. Most recently, Henry has told us that he does not want to have children because he does not want them to have to carry the burden of this disease. But what has made me a passionate advocate is not our family suffering from celiac disease. It is that it is not in any way unique. In 2019, I was invited to testify before the House Appropriations Subcommittee on the need for funding for celiac disease research. Prior to that, the Celiac Disease Foundation put out a call asking the celiac community why Congress should consider this. In less than a week, we received more than 800 heartbreaking stories of delayed diagnoses leading to serious health complications, including miscarriage and death. The losing battle in following a strict gluten-free diet, the poor quality of life due to the myriad ongoing symptoms, and the desperate need for adjunctive or monotherapy for celiac disease. And the stories continue to come in. So what are patient views regarding celiac disease? On the gluten challenge for diagnosis. Our 2-year-old with a family history of celiac disease was put on a gluten challenge and after only 3 weeks had lost 4 pounds and could barely get through the day. The GI refused to diagnose him until he finally completed a gluten challenge at age 3. We are scarred from having to keep feeding him gluten when it made him so sick. I was told by my doctor to try going gluten-free to see if it helped. Now I'm being told I cannot be in a celiac drug trial or be prescribed that drug in the future because I was not diagnosed with celiac disease. My only choice is to poison myself with gluten to get tested. I did try, but got too sick to keep going. On children with celiac disease. Finding reliable daycare that can provide safe food and educated staff is hard. Our dietitian was equally concerned that our older child's school district's approved gluten-free options were not actually prepared in a gluten-free manner. Our 7-year-old missed 33 days of school due to inadvertent gluten ingestion. The school solution is to have him sit at a cafeteria table by himself. Coaches and parents are afraid to provide food for our teams because they don't know what to make or they are afraid they will have to buy something different, more expensive for me. The disease has become a burden for everyone. Imagine spending countless hours and thousands of dollars searching for safe foods just so you don't poison your child and cause her damage. This is the nightmare we live on a daily basis. On having celiac disease in college. Our son met with a dietitian who thought she was preparing him for a life of celiac disease self-advocacy. Most 6th graders probably imagine college as an adventure where you meet new people. Our son's university vision is now shaped around fears of cafeteria cross-contamination. Our daughter gets a meal from her dorm cafeteria that's safe for her to eat. 2 hours later, she is uncontrollably throwing up, pooping her pants, and other floor members are upset they can't use the bathroom. The paramedics come and ask if she's having a drug overdose. They put her in the shower, leaving her pooped pants for all to see, and wipe up the vomit on the floor. For the next several days, she sleeps through class, has foggy brains so she can't do her homework. Her anxiety is through the roof with the humiliation, and she says she would rather die than continue on like this. On celiac disease in the workplace. Celiac disease changed how I interview for a job and will affect how I do my job and where I work. When a prospective employer said, "Let's meet for lunch to talk," I didn't want to disclose that I had celiac for fear of getting passed over because I wasn't one who could easily have lunch with future clients. I had to awkwardly ask if we could meet at the office. I didn't get the interview. Even after going on a strict gluten-free diet, I still face symptoms 1 to 2 days a week, the most invasive being brain fog and excessive diarrhea. I'm also afraid to drive to and from work because of the overwhelming fatigue. For me, life during the pandemic has been easier because now I can work from home near the toilet and I have fewer symptoms because I rarely leave the house to eat. On the cost of a gluten-free diet. My family's food budget has increased by $50 a week. We are a middle-class family and cannot afford the additional costs for breads, pastas, and specialized gluten-free foods. Who can afford to pay out of pocket to see a dietitian for help and pay the expensive gluten-free food and meals too? Financially, I spend about $400 a month for me and my spouse to eat gluten-free. I receive no assistance from the government. Sometimes I eat things that I know may not be safe for people with celiac simply because I cannot afford to eat the way I should. On life with celiac disease. I'm a teacher, retired Army officer, mother of 5, and a wounded warrior, and yet I am a prisoner to the gluten-free diet. I have many bad days filled with trips to the bathroom, nauseating and unbearable migraines. I'm trying my hardest to abide to the gluten-free diet, but it doesn't seem like it's ever enough. It would be life-changing to not have to fear a crumb of toast or any other possible source of cross-contamination. It would be amazing to have an option to reverse damage if I do have contact with gluten. It would be wonderful to not worry about the long-lasting damage to my body that comes from this disease. I graduate medical school this year. Having celiac disease has shaped me into being a better physician. I believe patients when they tell me there is something wrong with them. I would never ask a patient with type 1 diabetes to control their disease with diet alone. So why is it okay to tell someone with celiac disease, this is your only treatment? But we do not have only anecdotal evidence of the failure of the gluten-free diet for celiac disease patients. Launched in 2016, the Celiac Disease Foundation's Cure Celiac Patient Registry, under the USC Keck School of Medicine IRB, provides critical insight into the diagnostic journey and current monitoring of celiac disease, adherence to the gluten-free diet and treatment preferences, and quality of life and burden of disease using a number of validated measures. In 2019, the Celiac Disease Foundation partnered with Takeda to interrogate the Cure Celiac data. In the adherence to the gluten-free diet and celiac disease patient outcomes, real-world evidences from an international patient registry, Cure Celiac, we found that the primary reason for a celiac disease diagnosis was the presence of symptoms, that more than half of the patients had visited 3 or more healthcare practitioners for their gluten-related disorder prior to their celiac disease diagnosis, and that the mean time to diagnosis was about 5 years. Currently, about half of the patients surveyed were self-managing their own care. We also found that 50% of the patients in this study were unable to effectively adhere to a gluten-free diet, and that despite adherence to a gluten-free diet, many patients still had high persistent symptom burden and reduced quality of life. Furthermore, inadvertent gluten exposure resulted in a significant loss of productivity. Patients with excellent gluten-free diet adherence and high disease symptom burden reported on average more than 4 weeks of work or school missed annually. And even those with low disease symptom burden still missed more than 1 week of work or school. And those were the best case scenarios. Patients with fair or poor adherence to a gluten-free diet had worse outcomes, with those with poor gluten-free diet adherence and high disease symptom burden missing more than 8 weeks of school or work annually. Evidence suggests that adhering to a gluten-free diet is not universally effective at decreasing symptom burden, and that there is a significant unmet need for better treatment options. So what do celiac disease patients need? Even today, patients encounter physicians who either do not know enough to consider celiac disease or have preconceptions about the disease that lead them to refuse to consider it. Universal education and standardization of diagnostic and treatment guidelines are sorely needed, including a diagnostic alternative to a gluten challenge. Patients need monitoring tools that can measure the adequacy of disease treatment. Patients live in fear of inadvertent gluten exposure, not only of the symptoms they experience, but of what it means for their long-term health. And as the gluten-free diet is still the only treatment available, patients need insurance-covered dietitian visits to monitor their understanding and compliance with a gluten-free diet. With at least 50% of patients continuing to experience symptoms while following a strict gluten-free diet, it is imperative that there be adjunctive or monotherapy for celiac disease. And in tandem with this, plentiful, safe gluten-free foods whose cost is comparable to their gluten-filled counterparts. As I said at the beginning, if I leave you with one message today, it is that celiac disease is in fact a serious autoimmune disease with a devastating impact on both those afflicted and those who care for them. A disease in desperate need of your support. Thank you.